There they stood at the edge of a sea that moments before had been a highway, a path of escape. They had crossed between towering walls of water to the other side and then watched as those walls came crashing down. Submerged beneath the brilliant blue waves was the might of Egypt, drowned and defeated. The captors they had so feared lay motionless now, strewn across the sand, never to rise again. So long, slavery. That was all behind them now. Before them rose a pillar of cloud to cover them, to guide them on their journey. At night, it blazed with fire to light the way through the darkness. They were going home. They were going home. Today is part 3 of our series, I Am. Thanks so much for joining me. It's a joy to be able to open up the scriptures with you, to hear God's words to us together with you. Herein we are discovering Jesus, his identity, who he is in his own words. In a gospel that bears his name, Jesus' disciple and dear friend John records 7 statements that Jesus makes about himself. Each one of them pivots on those words, I am. I am. In our first 2 weeks, we unpacked the significance of that. This isn't merely how Jesus starts a sentence. Subject, verb. There's much more to it than that. He is making an unmistakable declaration of identity. I am God. All the way back in a book called Exodus, we see how God came down to rescue his people out of slavery in Egypt. And when asked his name, God said, I am who I am. I am who I am. Now, centuries later, Jesus arrives. He shows up on the scene and he says the same. I am. It's me. I'm here. And I have come down once again, as I did before, to set my people free. This time from slavery to sin. That brings us up to speed. Time for us to resume the conversation. I invite you to open up a Bible or Bible app and meet me in the Gospel of John. The Gospel of John. We are returning to chapter 8 where we were last time. And therein we find the first of our 7 I am statements. Now, to preface this, we're taking things a bit out of order. We're not going through them sequentially as they're written. We'll get into the why later on in the series. For now, just trust me. And we're picking up things at verse 12 of John chapter 8. Here we go. When Jesus spoke again to the people, he said, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. The Pharisees, these are the ruling religious group. These are the scholars, the intellectuals, the religious leaders that other people look to as authority. They challenged him. Here you are appearing as your own witness. Your testimony is not valid. They're trying to get Jesus on a technicality. You're not a credible source, Jesus. You're citing yourself. Jesus answered, even if I testify on my own behalf, my testimony is valid. For I know where I came from and where I'm going. But you have no idea where I come from or where I'm going. This is an incredible statement. Don't miss what Jesus just said to them. You are the religious leaders. You are the guides for God's people. But you yourselves are lost. Elsewhere, Jesus calls them blind. You're blind. Blind guides of the blind. But Jesus says, that's why I came. You judge by human standards. I pass judgment on no one. But if I do judge, my decisions are true because I'm not alone. I stand with the Father who sent me. In your own law, it is written that the testimony of two witnesses is true. Try to get Jesus on a technicality. You're gonna try to cite the law to me? I wrote it. I'm the one who testifies for myself. My other witness is the Father who sent me. Then they asked him, where is your Father? You do not know me or my Father, Jesus replied. If you knew me, you would know my Father also. He spoke these words while teaching in the temple courts near the place where the offerings were put. Yet no one seized him because his hour had not yet come. So there it is, the I am statement. I am the light of the world. I am the light of the world. Jesus is telling us something about who he is, and at the same time, he's showing us how this truth intersects with our lives. There's so much meaning, so much application for us here. Let's get to work. We're going to unpack this to discover where it lands, and at the outset, I'll just give you a map for today. We're making a number of stops together, moving from dark to light. Okay, that's the path here. Here's the route. A divide, a default, distance, disclosure, direction, and a decision. If you're taking notes and you missed that, fear not. We'll make stops along the way. First up is a divide. A divide. Jesus uses these terms, these images of light and darkness to lay out a contrast. This is a powerful and elemental picture of the struggle that takes place in our world and inside of each one of us. Light versus darkness. Two kingdoms are at war. The battle line has been drawn. The gauntlet has been thrown down. There is the light of good. There is the darkness of evil. It's right versus wrong. And the world in general, and the human heart in particular, is the battleground. The war that rages is inside of us. Which will reside in me? To which will I belong? Jesus puts the question to us. Which will it be? Now, light is a repeated theme that is used to describe Jesus and his ministry. Matthew's gospel states that with his arrival, light shined in a land of deep shadows. Earlier on in the same gospel, in John's gospel, he writes something similar. The very first chapter, in him, that's Jesus, was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. That's really good news, isn't it, church? Can I just say at the outset of this message, light wins. When the world gets dark, when your circumstances get dark, remember, light wins. Now, I want you to notice the implication in all of this. Darkness is the default. Darkness is the default. In the ordinary order of things, the status quo, the norm for the world as it is, darkness is the default. I wonder if you discovered that this world can be a very dark place. Have you noticed that? If you're inclined to think otherwise, might I suggest reading the headlines? Watch the news. 5 minutes, dose yourself, okay? I don't want you to get depressed. Now, on this point, I want to be clear, okay? Our position as a church is not pessimism. Okay, it's not. I'm not here to be a downer. I'm not here to depress you. We are here because of good news, church. But in order to hear the good news, sometimes we got to hear the bad news. Has anybody ever had this conversation with you? I've got good news and I've got bad news. Give me the bad news. I want to hear that first. In order to appreciate the light, We have to recognize darkness for what it is. So this is not pessimism, nor is this a devaluation of people. Okay, Scripture clearly teaches us that all people, every person you will ever encounter in your life is made in the image and the likeness of God and therefore has value. They have intrinsic worth. So much does God value us that Jesus left the perfection of heaven to come here, to bleed, to die, to make us his own. Like I said, good news. So this is not pessimism. It's not a devaluation of people when we say that darkness is the default. Rather, it is an honest assessment of our condition based on the Bible. Okay? The world and human nature trend toward darkness. Why is that? Why is that? Well, let's go back to the beginning of the story when the world was new and perfect. And our first parents disobeyed God. God created a perfect, beautiful, wonderful world. He created people. He said, you two kids have fun. Enjoy it all. Live it up. But I've got one rule. See that tree there? That's off limits. Any of you raise kids? Give me a rule. They deviated from God's good design, and as a result, sin and death entered in. And ever since, we've been living in a less than perfect place. And ever since, all of us who trace our lineage back to our first parents there in the garden, we inherit what Scripture calls a sinful nature. What does that mean? That means that we are inclined to do what they did. We're inclined to push the boundaries. We're inclined to test the limits. We are inclined to disobey, to deviate. What does that do? This departure creates distance from God. It creates distance from God. Now, Jesus says he's the light of the world. Okay, in another letter that the same guy John writes later in his life, he says that God is light and in him is no darkness at all. So let's follow the logic here. What happens when we distance ourselves getting further from the source of light? It gets dark. It gets dark. Departure creates distance. Distance creates darkness. When it gets dark, we get lost. When we get lost, we end up in places we were never meant to be. But into that, Jesus steps. Jesus comes to remedy that. He steps into the shadows. He brings light into the darkness. Now, what is the effect of that light? What does it do? There's a couple of things. Right after his well-known words that we find in chapter 3 of this gospel, we quote them often, "For God so loved the world that he sent Jesus." Right after that, Jesus continues the conversation, and he says this, starting there in verse 19, "This is the verdict. Light has come into the world, but I'm here, but people love darkness instead of light because their deeds were evil. Everyone who does evil hates the light and will not come into the light for fear that their deeds will be exposed. But whoever lives by the truth comes into the light so that it may be seen plainly that what they have done has been done in the sight of God." If I can sum that up, light discloses. Darkness obscures. Darkness conceals. Darkness hides. Light reveals. It illuminates so that we can see things as they are for what they are. It shows us the true state of things. In the light of Jesus' life and words, our own condition becomes clear. Based on this standard, am I living the right way or the wrong way? Based on this standard, how do my words, my thoughts, my habits, my life choices, my relationship line up? Now, this gets into the question of morality. Perhaps you've noticed we live in an increasingly secular culture. We live in a culture that is increasingly distanced from the sacred. We live in a culture where morality is increasingly subjective. Okay? It's not impartial, it's individual. It's not consistent, it is contextual. It's relative to my emotions. It's relative to my feelings, my opinions, my circumstances, which means, follow this though, it means that it's always changing because I'm always changing. The goalposts keep moving. And I hope you can see how dangerous of a trend that is. That is a very slippery slope. Church, there's an alternative. God is constant. God is steady. God is unwavering. God is unchanging. It's like the book of Hebrews says, Jesus Christ is the same yesterday and today and forever. He does not change. His character, who he is, that's the standard. Jesus is our benchmark. Jesus is our true north. Now, let me give you an analogy. I hope this will help. This past week, I was speaking with a friend who shared how he was working on a project. He was excavating a footer for a new building. And as part of that process, he set up a self-leveling laser level to guide the work. Okay, any of you worked with one of these gadgets? The light that it projected showed him how deep to dig. This is the mark that you're aiming for. Now that was necessary. Why? Because so often the ground is unlevel. It's on a slope. And that affects our perspective. So often what looks to our eyes as level isn't really level. Can I tell you, life is like that too? Do y'all know anything about standing on uneven ground? It affects our perspective. So often our circumstances, our situations, they're not as they should be, they're not level. So we cannot use those as a reference point for what is right or wrong. They will deceive us. We need a standard that is objective. A standard that is constant and true and unchanging. That standard is the character of God expressed in the person of Jesus, revealed to us in the scriptures. Here's my question. Is that your standard? Is that your benchmark? Is that the metric, the target that you're aiming for? There's another function of light, is this. Light directs. Light directs. Jesus says that whoever follows him will never walk in darkness. Now that word follow speaks of traveling on the same road. It's a picture of going together. I'm walking right beside you, Jesus. I'm right there with you. Where you go, I go. And Jesus tells those who are listening, I know where I come from and I know where I'm going. Y'all don't. So you need me. I'm here to show you the way. I'm here to show you the path. Church, can I tell you that when we try to navigate life by ourselves, on our own terms, we get lost? Take it from someone speaking from experience, we get lost. Jesus offers to be our guide. He offers to get us to our destination. Now here again, this ties in with the story of the Exodus, where we started the conversation today. God saved his people out of slavery in Egypt with the promise of bringing them to a better life. They did not know the way to get there. Now imagine God says to them, all right, I got you out. Figure it out. I got a nice land just waiting for you. Get yourself there. Can I tell you what would have happened? They would have gone back to Egypt. We know that because they say as much in the story. Moses, I don't like this wilderness. This wilderness, man, this is hot. It's dry. I'm thirsty. I'm hungry. I'm bored. Again, you ever raise kids? Man, y'all remember the good old days? The good old days back in Egypt when we were slaves. Yeah, that was the time. Man, let's go back there. God does not lead them out to leave them. God leads them out and continues to lead them. I myself will go with you. I myself will show you the way. I will get you to your destination. Again, there's a book called Nehemiah that is remembering this. God called his people to remember, to reflect on this. Don't forget what has happened. And Nehemiah says it this way: you divided the sea before them so that they passed through it on dry ground. But you hurled their pursuers into the depths like a stone into mighty waters. By day you led them with a pillar of cloud, and by night with a pillar of fire, to give them light on the way they were to take. Light on the way that they were to take. Y'all don't know the way. I know the way. See, when it was dark, when they could not see where they were going, God himself went ahead of them. He lit the way, and as they followed him, they had light. God did not force his people to follow. But the farther you get from the light source, Jesus does the same for us, church. He shows us what direction to take. He promises us, whoever follows me will not walk in darkness. You will have the light of life. I will be right there with you. I'll get you there. That brings us to our final stop for today, which is a decision. All of this hinges on a choice. Whoever follows me. It's conditional. Will you let Jesus lead you? Now, I know that question lands in different places for different people. For some of this is a choice maybe for the first time in our lives to trust Jesus to save us. It's owning our need. I can't get myself there. I can't get myself out. But he can. It's owning what he's done for us, applying that grace and that forgiveness to your life. And I would just say, if that's true of you, friend, today's the day. Today's the day. I would love to have a conversation with you. I would love to introduce you to the light of life. For some of us, it's a choice to follow Jesus' lead in your life, to look to his example, to hear his words, to read his words, to live by that standard. Jesus is the light of the world. He's the light of the world. Let him light your way. Let him lead you home, friend.